Hello, this is Dr. Lori. Welcome back to this next video on qualitative versus quantitative variables. And so I want to review really quickly about the whole idea that here we have variables. And so these variables are the things that we're measuring about each observation. So variables really are at the heart of collecting data and analyzing that and turning it into information. So here we have our variables, and in this particular situation we have the variable name, we have the variable height, we have the variable weight, we have the variable age, and we have the variable sex. We would probably keep adding more and more variables to that, and depending on what it is that we would like to study. And so I want to think about those kinds of variables in terms of quantitative versus qualitative variables. Now those particular names are difficult at best because they can be very confusing. And so I'm going to change them in part of our thinking, and I think it's a good idea for you to know all kinds of different variables or different kind of terminology. The qualitative variables often are called categorical. Now that's not a perfect name for them, but that's probably what I'm going to go with more. That's another word for qualitative variable. And the quantitative variable is often called scale or continuous. And so I want to give you some examples of those. A categorical variable is anything that if you were to imagine breaking your whole entire population up into categories, maybe you would break them up into categories based on sex. So if you have male and female, and we have two different areas or sides of the room or whatever, and we can split people up based on those categories, then we would be able to kind of put people in those little bunches. Another common qualitative or categorical variable is race ethnicity, and you'll learn in the process of public health what some of the common categories are. Often we end up with sort of 3 or 4. We have non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, other, and so we have ways of grouping people, and often this race ethnicity is a valuable variable that we need to include in our analysis, either as a confounder or a predictor or for a variety of different reasons. So race ethnicity, these are categories. We might even have categories that are in order. And so maybe we have when you exercise, do you exercise like a low intensity, a moderate intensity, or a high intensity, and kind of just give people an idea of what exactly those different categories mean. And so they could be that they're in order, but they aren't quantified by a specific number. On the other hand, we have these quantitative variables, and otherwise known as continuous or scale. None of these words fully capture exactly what it is we're after, and the word quantitative can be confusing, and here's why. I think it's valid for you to understand. If we call something quantitative, often that can be confused with something called quantitative research methods. Or quantitative data collection methods versus qualitative research methods and qualitative data collection methods. And so these are not the same thing. We can do qualitative research methods and we might be asking about the kinds of things that are quantitative. We might do quantitative research methods and be asking about qualitative variables. And so that's why these particular words are very confusing. And so I'm going to stick with either scale or continuous, or the word categorical. Now, in terms of a scale or a continuous variable, here's where the distinction between the quantitative variable and the qualitative variable is usually quite easy. In terms of the quantitative or scale or continuous variable, remember up above we had height, we had weight, we had age. When you're measuring these kinds of things, they're on a scale, and it's as if you have kind of like a ruler with little tick marks. And the difference between each of the adjacent ones, let's say if you go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, the difference between 1 and 2, either inches or years or whatever, is the same amount of change that you get as when you go from 4 to 5 or from 8 to 9. The difference between these tick marks or these ruler marks is constant. It's evenly spaced. And so what often we'll do is we'll say height in centimeters, weight in kilograms, age in years. And so the distinguishing feature of many scale and continuous variables is that you have these units of measure. We know exactly how many years when we put the number next to years. And as soon as you have this, it's like a little flag that's saying I am a scale variable or I am a continuous variable. So that can help you distinguish between these two kinds, these just general kinds. Now there are a few exceptions to that, and you'll kind of find those out as we go along. But for the vast majority of quantitative variables, scale, continuous variables, there's going to be this units next to whatever the number is. So if somebody is, say, 150 centimeters, or sorry, yeah, then that would indicate how tall they are, or they're 56 kilograms, or 23 years old. Then those units really help you to identify that as a scale or a continuous variable. In the next video, you're going to be finding out that these have little subdivisions. Specifically, qualitative variables or categorical variables can be dichotomous, nominal, or ordinal. I'll put it up here next to that one. And I've given you actually an example of those three kinds of variables. And in terms of scale or continuous variables, sometimes they have other names like interval or ratio. The SPSS computer package uses scale whenever it's talking about that kind of variable, probably because it's easy to think of something that's along a continuous scale. So these all refer to the same kind of variable, and often the distinction between interval and ratio does not impact what we do in terms of statistics when we are converting this information into graphs and tables and probabilities. So that ends up being a not important distinction between interval and ratio, but I will explain a little bit about what that difference is. So thank you for joining me on this video of qualitative versus quantitative variables.